This is an agency that evidently they don't have as cozy a relationship with as they do with the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration. The SEC is investigating whether or not Tesla breached security laws by failing to disclose a fatal crash in May. You say, wait a minute, May? We just heard about that a week or two ago. Yeah, that's because they kept it hidden for 2 months. They didn't inform NHTSA until 9 days after the crash, okay? But that was nothing compared to what they did to the rest of the country. If you look at the timeline, you will see May 4th, Tesla announced their first quarter results, okay? The fact that, oh, this is good news. Then 3 days later was the accident, the fatal accident for Joshua Brown. That was not made public. That was not made public for 54 days. They didn't tell NHTSA about it for another 9 days. Meanwhile, while all this was going on, Goldman Sachs upgraded Tesla stock to a buy on May 18th. Then on May 18th and 19th, Tesla announced that it was going to sell $1.5 billion in stock. Then they cut their price on June 9th of the Model S by $10,000. And that was when NHTSA disclosed that they were investigating consumer complaints of suspension failures on the Model S. But most amazingly, Tesla made it a requirement of those who are getting their warranty work on that done to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So here we are, we're in June 9th, and they continue to make stock deals and don't reveal this until June 30th. That's when the public finds out about it. That is the kind of, they're given the kinds of pass by NHTSA that we have seen Hillary Clinton given by the FBI. That's what happens with crony capitalism and with regulatory capture. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about developments with Brexit. There's a new prime minister. Will she move to press on with Brexit, or will they say, we're not going to do it? In a surprise move today, British Prime Minister David Cameron announced that he'll be stepping down by Wednesday and turning over the reins to someone else. Now, he announced immediately after Brexit that he would be stepping down because he had championed Brexit. Meanwhile, within his own Conservative Party, the party that is in power, there were several people who were competing for leadership. Boris Johnson was the obvious choice, but he took himself out of the running not long after Brexit happened. Then Michael Gove was also in the running. He had also supported leaving. He took himself out. Then it was down to 2 women. Now, one of those women who also supported Brexit just took herself out of the race. That means that there's only one person who is running, and that's Theresa May, who opposed Brexit until they won. And she said she was all in favor of it, presumably so she could become the leader of the Conservative Party. We'll see how this works out. But the announcement came just hours after her only rival in the race, the energy minister, unexpectedly abandoned her campaign and said the country could not afford a drawn-out political contest, needed to launch quickly into the complicated bargaining with the European Union over the split. Now, they say the move will likely accelerate the pressure on Britain to exit the EU. European leaders have said that Britain must act quickly as possible to get out. However, as I just pointed out, May campaigned against Brexit. She came back and said, today, Brexit means Brexit, and we are going to make a success of it. Well, we shall see if that's truly going to happen, or if it is merely a head fake. She has already said that she's going to delay it to the end of the year. And David Cameron had talked about having new leadership that would handle Brexit, that would file the required paperwork by sometime in September. So now it looks like they're going to delay it even further. Meanwhile, there's an article we have at INFOWARS.com from Reuters. Brexit vote was not binding, so Parliament must decide, say lawyers. Now, this is a large number of lawyers. More than 1,000 prominent British lawyers said that lawmakers should have a free vote in Parliament before any British leader takes a decision to trigger the formal EU divorce procedure by invoking Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. A separate group of lawyers, however, advised the British government that the Prime Minister does not need parliamentary approval to start the process. So what will it be? We've already had John Kerry, our Secretary of State, go over there and say, well, I don't think Brexit is really going to happen. What is the reasoning behind this? Well, the argument for parliamentary approval is that invoking Article 50 would be a violation of the authority of the EU. In other words, you've already lost your sovereignty, so shut up, you don't have anything to say about it. That's essentially what they're saying. They're saying that also that Parliament cannot, that a parliamentary law cannot be revoked by a prime minister or by the people themselves. Very interesting. They said it is an advisory result. the same sort of thing that we're seeing here in America as we head to the Republican convention. The GOP delegates are saying, well, all these primaries, we had the voters turn out and vote by the millions. That's simply an advisory. We will decide. And so that's what a lot of connected lawyers are now telling the British government. Now, if they want a reason why they made the right decision, take a look at this article that's up on INFOWARS.com from Bloomberg. EU banks need $166 billion, says a Deutsche Bank economist. Okay, he said Europe is extremely sick and must start dealing with the problems extremely quickly, or there will be an accident. He said, I'm no doomsday prophet, I am a realist. And as part of this, we see Italian banks have been weighed down by 360 billion euros of bad loans, okay? And that only gets worse for them because Britain voted to leave the European Union. See, they were going to stick Britain with a great deal of this bill. And that's one of the reasons that the British public said that they wanted to get out of the European Union. They need to remember that. He goes on to say, I do not expect a second financial crisis like 2008. He said the banks are much more stable today. They have more equity. What we face this time is a slow, long downward spiral. Oh, really? We have another article at INFOWARS.com from David Stockman. Remember the economist who advised Ronald Reagan? He said, here we go again. A redo of August 2007. He said, nearly everywhere we see these giant financial bubbles are starting to burst. And again, he cites what's going on in Italy with the banks. He also talks about sudden trading suspensions by 3 UK commercial property funds. He says it all boils down to being a repeat of what we saw in 2007. As they were saying, countrywide was simply the excesses of empire building, and Bear Stearns mortgage funds were purportedly owing to a lapse in supervision. But we're heading there again. Okay, remember, it was Standard & Poor's that said it's not a problem and gave AAA ratings to all these collateralized debts that these banks had created. So now we see that the financial crisis in the EU, just as it was designed to do, is bringing Europe to the brink, along with open borders. Here's John Bound with the report.
As Obama and his United Nations-directed stooges move to divide the United States and override the U.S. Constitution in order to federalize police under the Strong Cities Network in an aggressive bid to foment martial law, Europe is reaching the boiling point. Paul Joseph Watson writes, the head of French police recently warned that the country is on the verge of a civil war that could be triggered by another mass sexual assault of women by migrants like the one that occurred in Cologne on New Year's Eve. Patrick Culver, who is the head of the Directorate General of Internal Security, told members of a French parliamentary commission, we are on the brink of civil war. Culver said that the situation in France is so potentially explosive that one more major Islamist terror attack or mass migrant sexual assault could lead to a massive right-wing backlash. Culver says, this confrontation, I think, will take place. Even 1 or 2 attacks and it will happen. It therefore behooves us to anticipate and block all these groups. Hundreds of German women were sexually abused during a series of attacks in Cologne on December 31st, a situation that eyewitnesses described as being akin to a war zone. Most of the culprits, who were largely comprised of Arab and North African asylum seekers and immigrants, were never charged for the outrage. 2 of the men who were part of the mass frenzy of sexual assaults recently received suspended sentences. Pictures show them cheering and celebrating outside of court. And most recently, reports of a rash of molestations and rapes at 2 music festivals in Sweden. The New York Times reports, the police said there had been 5 reports of rape and 12 reports of sexual molestation at the Bravalla Festival in Norrköping, about 100 miles southwest of Stockholm, while 32 sexual assaults had been reported at Puttierparken, a music festival in Karlstad, about 190 miles west of Stockholm. We're gutted by these hideous reports, the British rock band Mumford & Sons, one of the headline acts at the Bravalla Festival, said in a Facebook post. They continued, we won't play at this festival again until we've had assurances from the police and organizers that they're doing something to combat what appears to be a disgustingly high rate of reported sexual violence. Culver's warning has been echoed by numerous other prominent police, army, and security experts throughout Europe. Back in May, former MI6 head Richard Dearlove cautioned that Europe faces a populist uprising if its governments fail to take control of the migrant crisis.
For the EU, however, to offer visa-free access to 75 million Turks to stem the flow of migrants across the Aegean seems perverse, like storing gasoline next to the fire we're trying to extinguish.
Top security experts in Germany told Chancellor Angela Merkel last October that the middle class was becoming radicalized as a result of her open borders migrant policy and that domestic disorder could ensue as a result. French security forces are also preparing for mass civil unrest and radicalized immigrants taking over entire neighborhoods, according to intelligence sources. Last year, Swiss Army Chief André Blattmann warned that the risk of social unrest in Europe was intensifying and that citizens should arm themselves. Zero Hedge reported the situation is growing increasingly risky, Blattmann begins. The threat of terror is rising. Hybrid wars are being fought around the globe. The economic outlook is gloomy, and the resulting migration flows of displaced persons and refugees have assumed unforeseen dimensions. Danish professor Nyborg wrote in 2016, "The current immigration policy gives us three alternatives: submission, repatriation, or civil war. Unless Europe starts to lead a responsible family, immigration, and integration policy stated by the theory of evolution, I think civil war is most likely." Truly, the will of the people is the only force that can drive back this social engineered invasion that common Europeans have come to gradually recognize for what it truly is, a hydra. Europe is under a growing hydra, as it is known in the Muslim world, an Islamic conquest where Muslims overwhelm a country's population by flooding it with refugees. Nothing more, nothing less. John Bound for INFOWARS.com.
Has Donald Trump picked his VP running mate? More and more the rumblings are that it's former General Michael T. Flynn. Michael T. Flynn has been a registered Democrat for most of his life. He seems to be pretty moderate on a lot of his policies. Is that smart for Donald Trump to do when, if Donald Trump gets assassinated, then we would be basically under the control of someone who leans more Democrat than he does Republican? I'm not trying to shoot down General Flynn. In fact, I've been a big supporter and fan of what he's done in his career, and I've followed a lot of his work. But I want to throw out one of the cons, one of the problems, before we look at the good points. Now, let's go back to about a month ago. At that time, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, who I think is a great guy, was at the top of the list. The problem is they're already pushing this racist narrative against Trump where he puts a star on one of his advertisements and they say it's anti-Semitic. I mean, it's getting crazy. And so they can obviously dig back into Republican politics in the 60s and 70s and the young Republicans that Senator Sessions was part of and try to claim some racism angle. I personally say double down, and who cares what the political correct are going to do? They're always lying anyways. Should he go for some Republican governor, woman, or senator? Yeah, if they're a constitutionalist, they've got what it takes, they've got a good record, I'm all for having a woman VP. But it shouldn't just be a gimmick because it's a woman. They're talking about Hillary doing Elizabeth Warren for an all-woman ticket just because they're women. Again, that's a gimmick. I'm sick of it. But getting back to why I like Michael T. Flynn, he really reformed a lot of the work in special forces. He called for overseas spying, not domestic spying. He called for agency sharing information. He tried to really stick up for people in the military, but he also had more courage than anybody I've ever seen in modern times in the military, and that he came out last year on Al Jazeera and other platforms, and he said, look, Obama basically ordered us to help al-Qaeda, to help ISIS, and that's who we've been fighting on the side of for years. And the reporter said, oh, my God, so they didn't know. And he says, no, they knew and ordered that. He talked about the elephant in the room.
In 2012, your agency was saying, quote, the Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. Mm-hmm. In 2012, the US was helping coordinate arms transfers to those same groups. Why did you not stop that if you're worried about the rise of quote-unquote Islamic extremism?
I mean, I hate to say it's not my job, but my job was to ensure that the accuracy of our intelligence that was being presented was as good as it could be. And I will tell you, it goes before 2012. I mean, when we were in Iraq, and we still had decisions to be made before there was a decision to pull out of Iraq in 2011. I mean, it was very clear what we were going to face.
Well, just to clarify once more, you are basically saying that even in government at the time, you knew those groups were around, you saw this analysis, and you were arguing against it, but who wasn't listening?